They always said undercover work was about playing a role so convincingly that you started believing it yourself. I used to think that was bullshit. Until I met him. Jack Harlow. I should have known better. I should have kept my walls up. But he had a way of making me forget who I was supposed to be. My name was Samantha Hayes, and I was a cop. A detective, technically, but that didn't change the fact that I was in way too deep. I had been assigned to get close to Jack, to gain his trust, and ultimately, to take him down. The infamous wandering shadow. A ghost in the system. But there I was, lying in his bed, his scent, old books and tobacco, clinging to my skin, and I no longer knew if I was playing the game or if the game was playing me. The first time I saw him in person had been at the Silver Lantern, a rundown bar on the outskirts of Chicago. I had studied his file 100 times before walking in. Age, 32. Eyes, green. Hair, dark. Distinguishing marks, none. But the file hadn't captured the way he moved, effortless, like a shadow that slipped through the cracks of reality. It hadn't captured the way his eyes pinned you down, reading every thought before you had a chance to voice it. My mission had been simple: infiltrate his life. Gain his trust. Find his weakness. I had approached the bar, ordering a whiskey neat, just like the file had said he liked. He had already been watching me, curiosity flickering in those sharp eyes. "You don't belong here," he had said, his voice smooth, low. I had smirked. "Neither do you." That had been how it started. A game of words, of guarded glances and slow-burning tension. He had been cautious, but I had been patient. I knew how to play the long game. By the time we had ended up in his motel room a week later, I had thought I had him wrapped around my finger. I had thought I was in control. I had been wrong. The neon light from the motel sign flickered through the thin curtains, casting shadows along the wall. Jack lay next to me, half asleep, his breathing steady. I traced the curve of his jaw with my fingers, memorizing him in a way I shouldn't have. The next day, I would have to report back to Detective Catherine Blake. She had been after Jack for years, ever since he had slipped through her fingers. She didn't trust me, didn't think I could handle him. Maybe she was right. Because right then, as I watched him sleep, I didn't feel like a cop. I felt like a woman who was falling for the wrong man. A cop's job was to tell the difference between truth and lies. But when you lived inside a lie long enough, the lines blurred. That was what was happening to me. I knew what I was supposed to do. Every word I spoke to Jack, every touch, every glance, it was all supposed to be part of the mission. Gain his trust. Get close. Take him down. But the way he looked at me, like he could see through the layers of deception, made me wonder who was really in control here. The first time Jack tested me, it had been in a place like this. A cold, empty alley, the distant hum of city life echoing through the walls. He had led me there after we had spent another evening at the Silver Lantern, pushing drinks across the table, exchanging sharp words that felt more like a dance than a conversation. I had played my role well, laughing at the right moments, letting my touch linger just long enough to make it believable. But he was no fool. "You're too good to be true," he had said, his green eyes scanning me like a riddle he was trying to solve. I had smirked, leaning against the brick wall, pretending to be unfazed. "Maybe you're just paranoid." Jack had stepped closer, and for the first time, I had felt it, not just the weight of the case, but the pull of him. He had smelled like rain-soaked leather, cigarette smoke, and something else. Something dangerous. Maybe, he had murmured, watching me with an intensity that sent a slow burn through my veins. Then, just as quickly, he had taken a step back, his expression unreadable. That night, I had sent my usual report to Catherine Blake, detailing my progress. But I had left something out. I hadn't told her how Jack had made me hesitate. Jack stirred beside me, his breath warm against my shoulder. I glanced at the clock, 4:12 a.m. It would be a few hours before I needed to meet with Catherine Blake. I should have left. Slipped out of the sheets, out of the room, out of the twisted web I had spun around myself. But I stayed. I felt Jack shift, and suddenly, his voice cut through the silence. "You're awake." I turned slightly, finding his sharp gaze on me in the dim light. "So are you." He studied me for a long moment, and then, in a voice laced with something I couldn't quite place, he asked, "Are you running from something, Samantha?" The irony of the question almost made me laugh. "Maybe," I whispered. He reached up, brushing a stray lock of hair from my face, his fingers lingering. "If you are, I won't chase you." Liar. Jack was a hunter by nature. If he ever learned the truth, who I really was, what I was here to do, I wouldn't just be running. I'd be dead. But for now, I let myself believe the lie. For now, I let him pull me back into the shadows. Trust was a fragile thing. I had spent weeks weaving a story, making Jack believe that I was someone I wasn't. But the more I played my part, the more I questioned who I really was. Jack Harlow was supposed to be my target. A mission. A ghost I would lure into the light. Instead, he was becoming my obsession. The wind howled through the rusting train cars, carrying the distant hum of the city beyond. Jack and I had met here, away from prying eyes, away from the suffocating weight of walls and locked doors. He had been on edge. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his fingers twitched near the pocket where I knew he kept his knife. "I don't like being watched," he had said, his voice low, almost too calm. I had taken a slow breath, keeping my expression steady. "Who's watching you?" His eyes had locked onto mine, sharp and unreadable. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." A test. Another one. Jack trusted no one completely, not even me. I had stepped closer, closing the space between us, feeling the electricity coil in the air. "Maybe you're just paranoid." He had chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Or maybe I'm right." His gaze had searched mine, looking for cracks, for the smallest sign that I was hiding something. And for the first time, I had wondered if he saw them. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The envelope containing my latest report sat on the passenger seat. Inside, the truth was neatly typed out in cold, clinical words. Jack Harlow trusts me. Jack Harlow suspects he is being watched. Jack Harlow is getting dangerous. I should have been relieved. It meant I was close to the endgame. Close to doing what I had been sent to do. But my chest felt tight. Because what I hadn't written in that report was the part that mattered most. I wasn't sure I wanted to betray him anymore. Jack was sitting in the chair by the window when I returned. The lamp cast a golden glow over his features, making the sharp angles of his face look softer than they really were. I closed the door behind me, my heart pounding. "You're awake." He didn't answer right away. Just studied me, his fingers rolling an old coin across his knuckles. "I have a question," he said finally, voice quiet but firm. I swallowed. Okay. He turned the coin between his fingers once more before looking up at me. Who are you, Samantha? The air between us went razor thin. I forced a small smile, ignoring the ice creeping into my veins. What kind of question is that? Jack didn't smile back. His green eyes locked onto mine, searching, just like he had in that alley, in that train yard, in every stolen moment between us. And for the first time, I felt like the game was slipping from my hands. The motel room felt smaller than before. The air was thick, laced with unspoken words and the scent of cigarettes and old paper. Jack sat there, still twirling that damn coin, his eyes locked onto me like he could see straight through my skin. Who are you, Samantha? I felt my pulse hammering in my throat. There it was. The moment I had been dreading. The moment I had been trying to outrun since the second I walked into his life. I forced a smirk, leaning casually against the doorframe. What kind of question is that, Jack? He didn't blink. The kind that might save my life. The weight of those words pressed down on me like a fist to the ribs. I think you already know who I am, I said, keeping my voice steady. Jack leaned back in his chair, stretching his legs out in front of him. He studied me, his expression unreadable, but his fingers never stopped moving. The coin flipped, turned, danced between them. A restless habit. A tell. You say all the right things, he murmured, tilting his head slightly. You look at me like you mean it. Like you see me. But I've been hunted before, Samantha. And I know what it feels like. My breath caught. Jack Harlow was smart. Too smart. I had spent weeks infiltrating his world, slipping into his trust like a ghost in the night. But had I underestimated him? Had I let myself get too close? You think I'm hunting you? I asked, arching a brow. Jack's lips quirked into something that might have been a smile, but it was devoid of warmth. I think, he stood, slow and deliberate, stepping toward me. That if you are, you're better at it than anyone else I've ever met. The heat of his presence wrapped around me like a slow-burning fuse. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to step back, to put space between us. I didn't. Instead, I tilted my chin up, holding his gaze. Then why are you letting me stay? A beat of silence. Jack lifted a hand, brushing his knuckles lightly along my jaw. The touch was almost reverent, but his eyes were testing me. Watching for the slightest crack. Maybe, he said, voice rough, I want to see how it ends. Detective Catherine Blake was the kind of woman who never wasted words. Her office was as sharp as she was clean, cold, efficient. A place where emotion had no place. She stood by the window, her arms crossed, watching the city below. You're running out of time, Hayes. I sat across from her, my hands folded in my lap. I know. She turned to face me. Do you? I met her gaze, unflinching. I'm in deeper than anyone else has ever been. He trusts me. Blake narrowed her eyes. Trusts you? She took a slow step forward, placing both hands on the desk as she leaned in. Or is he playing you? The words were a gut punch. Because I wasn't sure of the answer anymore. Listen to me, Hayes. Blake's voice dropped into something softer. Almost concerned. Jack Harlow is dangerous. We both know it. I need you to end this. End this. A simple command. A death sentence wrapped in bureaucracy. I should have nodded. I should have agreed. Instead, I hesitated. And Blake saw it. Her jaw tightened. "Don't tell me you're getting attached." I forced a scoff. "It's an assignment, detective. That's all." Blake studied me for a long moment before finally nodding. "Then do your job." His fingers traced my jawline, slow and deliberate. My breath was shallow, my heart a war drum in my chest. I had two choices. I could follow orders. End this. Turn him in. Or I could step further into the abyss. Jack's eyes darkened as he leaned in. "What's it gonna be, Samantha?" The line between duty and desire had never been thinner. And I was about to cross it. I should have turned him in. I should have walked away, reported back to Blake, and let the Bureau handle the rest. But I didn't. Instead, I kissed him. And in that moment, everything unraveled. Jack's fingers curled around my waist, pulling me against him, the heat of his body sinking into mine. His lips moved against mine with a hunger that mirrored my own, and for a few stolen seconds, I let myself drown. Then, bang! The motel door exploded open. The world shattered into chaos. Jack reacted first, faster than I thought possible, grabbing my wrist, yanking me down just as gunfire tore through the room. Glass shattered, the bedside lamp burst apart in a spray of sparks, and my heart slammed against my ribs. "Move!" Jack's voice was sharp, urgent. The next second, we were running. Bullets tore through the walls behind us as we crashed through the flimsy bathroom door. I hit the tiled floor hard, my breath knocking out of me, but Jack was already moving, kicking the rusted window frame, shoving it open. "Go!" He pushed me up first, my fingers scrambling for grip as I hauled myself onto the fire escape. The cold night air hit me like a slap. Sirens wailed in the distance, the city buzzing with danger. My head spun as I looked back down. Jack was already climbing up behind me, his jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with something between rage and exhilaration. "Who the hell was that?" I gasped. Jack didn't answer. He grabbed my hand and pulled. Then we were running again. Detective Catherine Blake stepped out of her car, gun drawn, her expression cold as steel. "Move in," she ordered into her radio. "No survivors." Her men spread out, tactical vests catching the glow of neon motel lights. They knew who they were dealing with. Jack Harlow wasn't just any fugitive. He was the one who got away. Not this time. Blake's jaw tightened as she watched the two figures above, Samantha running beside him. A flicker of something dark crossed her face. "Oh, Hayes," she murmured. "You really fucked up this time." Then she lifted her gun and took aim. We hit the top of the fire escape and leaped onto the roof. My lungs were on fire, my legs screaming in protest, but adrenaline shoved me forward. Jack pulled me behind a rusted vent, shoving me down as another bullet whizzed past. "Your friends have a terrible way of saying hello," he muttered. I shot him a glare. "You think this is funny?" He grinned, the bastard actually grinned. "A little." "Jack, focus!" I hissed. "We need a plan." "I have one." My pulse hammered. "And?" He looked over the edge of the rooftop, scanning the streets below. Then he turned to me, eyes gleaming with something reckless. "We jump." My stomach dropped. "Are you insane?" "Debatable." He grabbed my wrist. "But we don't have time to argue." Footsteps pounded behind us, Blake's men were on the roof. No choice. Jack yanked me forward, and we jumped. Free fall. Wind roaring. The city swallowing us whole. Then, impact. We hit an old canvas awning, the fabric straining beneath our weight before tearing. We crashed down onto a fire escape below, metal groaning under us. Pain jolted through my side, but I was alive. Jack pulled me up. "You good?" I gasped for breath. "Ask me later." "No time for later, sweetheart." He grabbed my hand. "We gotta run." And we did. Through the maze of alleyways, weaving through the city's underbelly, shadows stretching long beneath flickering streetlights. Blake wasn't far behind. I could feel it. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't sure which side I wanted to win. Jack pulled me into a narrow alley, pressing me against the cold brick wall, his body shielding mine from sight. Our breathing was ragged, the adrenaline still pounding in my veins like a war drum. Footsteps thundered past the entrance of the alley, Blake's men. Jack's grip on my wrist tightened. I felt the heat of his skin, the tension in his muscles. He was calculating, already mapping the next move. I forced a whisper. "Where now?" His eyes flickered toward the street. "Train station." I frowned. "That's suicide. It'll be crawling with cops." A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "That's what makes it fun." Jesus Christ. Catherine watched the alleyway from across the street, her jaw clenched, fury curling hot in her chest. She had warned them. Warned the higher-ups that putting Hayes on this case was a mistake. Now look at her. Running with the enemy. Blake exhaled sharply, gripping her radio. "They're heading south. Block every exit near the station. This ends tonight." Her fingers hovered over the trigger of her Glock. She should have shot Jack when she had the chance. The station was a storm of movement. Commuters rushing, neon signs buzzing, the scent of coffee and metal hanging thick in the air. Jack pulled me through the crowd, weaving effortlessly, his fingers laced around mine like a lifeline. He moved like he belonged here, like he had done this before. Because he had. My stomach twisted. "Where's your way out?" I whispered. His lips barely moved. "Southbound freight train. Back platform." I nodded, scanning the exits. Every instinct screamed at me, this was a trap. Blake wasn't stupid. Then. "Freeze! Hands up!" Shit. The station erupted with chaos. Armed officers flooded the area, passengers screaming, scrambling away. Jack's grip tightened, not letting go. We ran. Gunshots split the air. Screams. A woman dropped her coffee. A man hit the floor, covering his head. I pushed forward, my legs burning, my pulse hammering in my skull. Jack yanked me toward the maintenance tunnels. "This way." Then, pain. A searing, white-hot burn in my side. I stumbled. Jack caught me before I hit the ground, his face twisting in alarm. I looked down. Blood. My blood. I'd been shot. Jack's jaw tightened. His hands pressed against my wound, but there was no time. He lifted me, strong, desperate. "Stay with me, Hayes." Footsteps thundered closer. Blake's voice, cold and sharp, end of the line, "Harlow." Jack's eyes locked onto mine. And I knew this was it. The moment we chose. Stay and fight? Or disappear forever? Pain. That's all I felt. It spread like fire through my body, searing, relentless. My vision blurred, the dim flickering of the station lights above me casting Jack's face in gold and shadow. His hands pressed down on my wound, warm and firm, but even through the haze, I could see it. Panic. Jack Harlow never panicked. But right now, he was breaking. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought it might snap, his green eyes wild and desperate. Not calculating, not in control. Just a man watching something slip through his fingers. I coughed, tasting copper. Jack. Shut up. His voice was hoarse, raw, like he was barely holding it together. He wasn't even looking at me. His focus darted between the approaching officers, the exits, and my bleeding body. His mind was at war. Run or stay. And for the first time in his life, he couldn't decide. I forced a smirk. I told you the train station was a bad idea. His grip on me tightened. His shoulders rose and fell with shallow breaths. Jack Harlow, the infamous wandering shadow, the man who never stayed, never got attached, was losing his mind. I'd never seen him like this. Not once. But I had to be the one to make the choice for him. I reached up, my fingers brushing his jaw. He flinched. "You have to go," I whispered. His eyes snapped to mine. "No. Jack. No." His voice was sharp, unhinged. Begging. Like he was trying to force the world to listen, to change fate itself. "I'm not leaving you here. I can. There's no time." The footsteps were closing in. Blake's voice barking orders. Jack's hands shook. Not from fear. From rage. From the sheer, suffocating agony of what he had to do. And then, just like that, the dam broke. Jack let out a ragged breath, his body trembling. He pressed his forehead against mine, his scent old books, tobacco, something uniquely him, enveloping me. His voice cracked. "I don't. I know." I felt it. The way his body caved in, the way his fingers curled against my cheek. Jack didn't do emotions. He didn't do love. But this was real. And that's why he had to go. I smiled, weak, bloody. "Make it worth it." His breath hitched. And then he pulled away, yanking something from his pocket. A folded piece of paper. He shoved it into my palm, closing my fingers over it, his hands lingering for just a second longer than they should. His lips barely moved. "Don't read it until I'm gone." I wanted to tell him I wouldn't. That I'd keep my eyes on him until the last second. But I couldn't. Because Jack Harlow was already gone. The cold steel chair dug into my back. My head was heavy, my body drained, but I stayed upright. I had to. Blake sat across from me, arms crossed, her expression carved from ice. "You should be in a hospital," she said flatly. I exhaled. "I'm fine." She scoffed. "Right. You got shot, ran away with a fugitive, and now you're sitting in front of me, acting like it's just another day." I didn't answer. Because I had already decided what the report would say. Blake didn't know everything. She didn't know about the note in my pocket. About the truth Jack had given me. About how he had known I was undercover before I had even spoken to him that night at the bar. I never had him wrapped around my finger. He had me wrapped around his. I straightened, meeting her eyes. I was his hostage. Blake's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" I kept my expression blank. I didn't go with him willingly. He used me as leverage to escape. A lie. A perfectly crafted, untouchable lie. Blake studied me, searching for cracks. She wouldn't find any. Because I had learned from the best. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Fine. Write your damn report." I nodded, standing slowly. The pain in my side flared, but I ignored it. Because there was only one thing I cared about right now. The note. The city hummed outside my window. The sirens, the distant chatter, the life that continued despite everything. I sat on my couch, fingers trembling as I unfolded the paper. Jack's handwriting was messy, sharp-edged. You were never supposed to mean anything. But you did. You still do. Don't come looking for me, Samantha. This is the only way. A tear slipped down my cheek. And I let it. Because Jack Harlow was gone. But somewhere, in the shadows, I knew. He was still watching.
Jack may be here, maybe right next to you.